Today, I'm going to explain to you exactly how fat loss works and where the fat actually goes when you start to burn it. So, we've all heard the term before, quote unquote, burn fat, but what does that actually mean? And where does the fat go when you start to lose weight? And today, we'll be breaking down the real science of fat loss. So, first off, let's go over some common misconceptions. So, does fat turn into energy? In a way, yes, but energy is also a process. So there's an entire process to it as well. So it's not just fat that turns into energy. There's other things going on. And also, does fat turn into muscle? And no, that's impossible. They're completely different tissues, not related. So I don't know who started that urban legend, but it just isn't the case. And can fat just melt away? And not quite. There's a system and a process to this, which we're going to be getting into. I'm going to try not to get too sciencey with it because I'll be honest with you, it's just flat out boring. And who really cares? Let's just get into how it works briefly, and also what you can do about it. So, the real answer here is that fat is oxidized and it exits through the body through breathing, sweat, and urine. So, there's your answer right there. And if you don't know me, I'm Matt Bauer. I own Red Wolf CrossFit in Huntington Beach, California with my wife, Caitlin. And we started this podcast with one goal in mind, and that was to make fitness education accessible, engaging, and effective for everyone. So let's quickly define terms. We're going to briefly go over the fat loss process from like kind of a sciencey way. We're just going to get that out of the way first, and then we're going to get into what you actually can do to burn fat more effectively. So first off, what is fat? Fat is essentially just stored energy. It's just stored in tissue. They're stored as triglycerides, and what fat essentially does is that it acts as an energy storage or energy reserve. So when food take intake or you're not eating enough is lower than you're expending energy, then it has some sort of things that some energy can tap into at a later time. So essentially just storing it for later. Uh, so how fat storage actually works. So when you eat more calories than your body burns, that excess energy is then going to convert into triglycerides and stored in fat cells. So it doesn't matter what you eat. I don't, if you eat excess calories, it could be any kind of macro. It doesn't matter. You can overeat on vegetables. It's really hard to, but if you did, it would still be stored as fat. So it doesn't matter what you eat. And then when you eat fewer calories than you burn, those stored triglycerides are then broken down and used for energy. Okay, so essentially, yeah. So I mean, you get the point. Let's go over the fat loss process. So, how is it actually oxidized? And I don't want to get too sciencey into this, but essentially, it's oxidized when you're in a calorie deficit, and then it starts sending hormonal signals like, "Oh no, we need food." And what this does, what essentially happens, is that enzymes are going to be broken down and stored as triglycerides, and then they're converted into glycerol and into free fatty acids. Okay, a lot of science there, but there is a process to it. There's more I could go into it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to bore you that much because I like you. Uh, that's and then the next step here is that the transport. So now it's broken down, but then it's literally transported in your bloodstream as free fatty acid cells after it's broken down, and it's mostly broken down through the muscle in the liver, and then that's when it's used for energy because that's why we like to exercise because we need to we're expending energy. So sometimes we'll use fat as an energy source. And then the third step is oxidation. So actually turning fat into actual usable energy. So it's broken down, it's in the bloodstream. And now what happens? So the fatty acids enter mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And you can actually build mitochondria through long aerobic pieces. And inside mitochondria are basically it breaks down into basically like breaks down into acetyl CoA. Okay, and enters the Krebs cycle, and it produces ATP, which is the body's main energy currency. Okay, so it essentially goes through all that. Yes, it's very confusing. Even I don't remember some of this stuff when I went through school. And then how fat actually leaves the body. Now, this is where we actually get into the actual interesting part. So the primary exit route is actually surprisingly breathing through CO2. So you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out CO2, and 84% of fat loss actually happens through exhalation. Okay, so this is why doing aerobic work, and this is why also what makes CrossFit, in my opinion, just so effective, because it puts you into such an oxygen debt. I actually did another whole nother podcast on oxygen debt, which you can go back and check out. But those carbon atoms from the triglycerides are then broken down and released into carbon dioxide, which you breathe out. Okay. So essentially, the harder you work, so if you exercise a lot, if you have a lot of non-exercise activity, or if you have a high metabolic rate, so a high metabolic rate meaning that you just have a high metabolism and muscle mass is one of the main things that's going to affect metabolism, then the more CO2 you're going to exhale equals the more fat loss. And also the easier it is to stay leaner, because this is why, in my opinion, the best way to lose fat is actually to gain muscle, because it's going to increase your metabolic rate. You're going to be more active naturally because you have more muscle. And then obviously when you exercise, the muscles are going to be more effective and you're gonna be able to push more weight. If you push more weight, you're gonna be expending more energy, and then you'll be able to stay leaner. The other exit route is through water or through sweat and urine. Okay. And this only accounts for about 16% of fat loss is actually leaves as water. So excess water from fat oxidation is removed through sweat, urine, and other bodily fluids. And what doesn't happen is that fat doesn't just magically melt off your body. Okay. You can't just sweat out fat. Contrary to popular belief. There's no detox teas. You can't go in the sauna. I mean, you can go in the sauna. It'll help a little bit, but fat loss will essentially do not a whole lot for fat oxidation. And the best way to maximize fat oxidation is really to be in a calorie deficit, and you shouldn't be too aggressive with your calorie deficit itself, but we're looking at about anywhere between 10 and 20% below maintenance calories is sustainable. Okay, so you just that's a calculation you have to do on your own. What I like to do, a simple calculation that you can do right now, is simply take out your phone, take your body weight, multiply that by 14, and that'll give you a very moderate cut. That's actually something that's very sustainable, to where you won't feel too hungry. Well, you hopefully won't feel hungry at all, but you won't feel too hungry, and that will actually be able to be sustainable. And crash dieting is not something that I recommend at all. Some people still do it, but it's one of those things where we always see a lot of relapse. So that's why I just like taking your body weight, multiplying it by 14. That'll give me a moderate deficit. And and not to mention that if you do a crash diet as well, that's going to reduce your metabolism because you're not eating as much and you won't have as much energy to be active. And that you'll also sacrifice muscle mass for that. And when you sacrifice muscle mass, guess what? That there goes part of your metabolism as well. So a lot of people think as they get older that that their metabolism is slowing down, when really they just are either losing muscle because they're not eating enough, they're not being active enough, and that's a very common issue. Because I mean, I don't really I mean, how many older people do you see with a lot of muscle? Not much. So that's why strength training, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important things that we emphasize at my gym, and something that we always try to strive for. And perfect. That leads me to my next point, which is prioritize strength training. So muscle requires more energy to maintain. Okay, so the muscle also weighs more than fat, so you're gonna be exerting more calories, and the more muscle you have, the more fat you're gonna burn at rest as well. Okay, because fat just requires more energy than fat. So on average, you're gonna burn about an average of 6 calories per pound of muscle, and only about an average of 2 calories per pound of body fat mass. Okay, so that's just a little fun fact there. And then that's just average. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different. That's just what we kind of know. And then another thing you can do is increase your NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is just simply just doing non-exercise activity. So walking more, taking the stairs, moving throughout the day, parking far away when you're shopping for something. And the more movement you have, then the more CO2 you're gonna be exhaling and the more fat burned. Okay, this is why I love long, slow aerobic work for burning body fat specifically, because it's very sustainable, it's not intense, and you can do it pretty much all the time and recover from it really quickly. And when you do get good blood flow, you're going to get a 2 for 1. You're not only be burning more fat, you're going to be building an aerobic base, which will help you exert more energy during a CrossFit WOD. And also on top of that, it kind of gives you a nice flush, so you'll get good blood flow and nutrients to your muscles as well, which will help kind of flush out some of that lactic acid or lactate from the workout before that you've done. Now using cardio. So a lot of people think that the only way to burn fat is to do more cardio. And It's true that it does help because, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because we know that the more we exhale, the more CO2 we emit, the more we're gonna burn fat, but at the same time, we have to use cardio or aerobic work strategically. So because sometimes people go overboard, and there's a big difference between doing cardiovascular respiratory endurance and aerobic work, okay? And we're gonna get into that right now. So you have to use this strategically. So low intensity, steady state work or basically aerobic work easy aerobic work. So we're talking like zone 2, like moderate heart rate. So the heart rate is just above a warm-up pace, burns more fat directly than but fewer total calories. So just a quick note there. And then when you start doing like more cardio-based high intensity workouts, think of like a 20, 30-minute AMRAP or EMOM or something like that, that burns more calories in less time. But then it's not always exactly something that's very sustainable that you can do, 5, 7 days a week. So that's why we like to sprinkle in those long, slow aerobic pieces, and that way, we can we can keep using that CO2 or that breathing patterns to oxidize fat. And then the next thing you can do is obviously get enough sleep and manage stress. I know you're an adult listening to this, and I know this is hard, but poor sleep does increase cortisol, which is a fat storage hormone. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Poor sleep increases cortisol, which is a fat storage hormone. Okay. So quality sleep equals better recovery and not only better hormone regulation, aka your cortisol won't be as high, and it'll also help your metabolism. Okay, you also have to think of it like this. Like if you don't sleep as much, you're also going to feel more hungry because you're just awake longer. Okay, when you're asleep, and you sleep as long as possible, guess what? That's also time that you're not eating. And we all know that kinda like when you wake up or even right when you go to bed, you're not really want that you don't really don't wanna go to bed full, and when you wake up, it takes time for your hunger hormones to kinda kick in and be like, "Oh, I'm kinda hungry." So, that's also a kind of a 2 for 1 there that you can get. And let's quickly debunk some of these fat loss myths. So, does fat turn into muscle? No, they're completely different tissues, kind of like a little recap of what we kinda started with here. And does fat loss equals more sweating? And no, not necessarily. Sweating is just fluid loss, not fat loss. It only counts for about 16% of your fat oxidation. And there's another common one I get all the time is does fasted cardio burn more fat? And there's actually it can, but there's minimal difference. Not to the point where it's like you have to go out of your way to actually do this. And total calories burned actually matter more. So it doesn't really matter kind of when you eat or when you do your aerobic work, as long as you're in a deficit, and or if your goal is fat loss, as long as you're in a slight caloric deficit, anywhere between 300 to 500 calories is very sustainable, and then you do your normal exercise and you're increasing your activity and you're sleeping well, then good things are going to happen. Um, and do you need to cut out carbs to burn fat? And no, not necessarily. And fat oxidation happens as long as you're in a calorie deficit, like I said before. And does eating late at night stop fat loss? And meal timing really doesn't matter. It just comes down to daily caloric intake. Okay. And I kind of want to reverse a little bit on the cut carbs to burn fat. So I know some of you are going to kind of bring up things like, the Atkins diet or the keto diet or the carnivore diet. Okay. Where there's very minimal carbs, or even zone diet is somewhat low carb. And yes, people do get results from that. But you also have to remember that a lot of people who do see results on this, and they tend to overeat on carbs, right? And carbs, especially processed carbs, have a lot of extra calories. So that's why when someone removes that entire thing, they're just essentially going to a deficit, and they're removing the thing that has the highest amount of calories, other than fat, of course, that is that's keeping them overweight. Okay, it's really easy to overeat on carbs. I find that protein is very hard to overeat on. Most people feel really full when they're on a lot of protein. That's why we always preach a high protein diet, because essentially what that does is it keeps you satiated longer. Be just fancy word for keeping you full longer, and it keeps you from grabbing other foods that you normally snack on. And plus, to be real with you, those carbohydrate or those processed carbohydrates are much more convenient to grab and go, and they also taste good. So that's why that those diets do work, and more power to you. If it works, great. But we also have to think about what's sustainable. Like I always tell people, if you can't do it for a decade, don't do it for a day. So if you can do that for a decade, then by all means stick with that. But I mean, I think we all like a little bit of carbs. So Some closing thoughts on this. Final takeaway is that fat loss isn't magic, it's science. And you need to essentially be in a calorie deficit. Doesn't really matter what else you do. I mean, you can eat all the carbs you want as long as you can eat Skittles for all I care and cereal. But as long as you're in a calorie deficit, you are gonna burn. It's just thermodynamics. And the more movement you add and the more time you take to do non-exercise activity, then your body will take care of the rest. So here are some actionable steps that you can actually take today to actually start making some progress on some fat loss. So the first thing you can do is track your food just simply for awareness. Okay. Don't get too caught up on if I'm eating on too many carbs or if I'm eating too much protein or calories. That's why I actually don't like MyFitnessPal. I actually recommend just using ChatGPT for this. If you have the free version, it'll still work. Just be like, hey, I'm just put in there what you did. You can even take a picture and it'll calculate everything for you. Even if you type in like, hey, I got such and such from Sprouts, then it'll actually populate. It'll actually be somewhat accurate. It's not 100% accurate, but who cares? We're just doing this for awareness, not for actually trying to do a full on cut. We're just saying like, okay, where are some small tweaks that I can make along the way? The next thing you can do is move more to increase CO2 output. Okay, so more walking, more rowing, more aerobic work, non-exercise activity. Just keep moving around as much as possible. Park far away, take the stairs, whatever. Just do things that are inconvenient for you physically. And then strength train to preserve muscle. Okay, this is a big one. And you have to have a high protein intake. I'll throw that in there along with this one. But if you're not strength training and you're only doing aerobic work, that might help, but it's going to speed up the process if you put on muscle as well. We already went into that on how muscle burns more energy than fat, and even at rest. So just think how much more it burns with activity. Okay, that's why muscular people, it's easier for them to stay lean. And then also you want to sleep well and you want to be consistent with sleeping well because that's going to lower your cortisol. It's also going to help you stay away from the kitchen a little bit longer and in a very practical sense. And also you're just going to feel better overall. And when you sleep better, you're going to have more energy for the activity, for doing the steps, because when you don't sleep well, you're going to end up being a couch potato and then you're going to sit there and you're going to want to eat more and then you're going to grab for things because, I mean, who makes good decisions when they're really tired? Nobody, including myself. So do me a favor, if this helped you, please share it with a friend. We're just growing this organically. This is completely free. I always, whenever I check the numbers and I see, we get more follows or more likes, it's really keeps me motivated to keep doing this. So that's the only thing I ask of you. And I really appreciate you listening. And until next time, good luck. Have fun. Nailed it.